In this video, I'm going to share with you a systematic workflow you can adopt to get far better results from AI coding assistants, regardless of which assistant you choose. I'm going to show you a system that's modeled after the way we human software engineers work. We're going to use a repeatable workflow system that's backed by a chain of prompts that have been tuned specifically to be used together with an AI coding assistant to lead you through the process of planning and implementing a new set of features. We'll maximize our use of AI, but by playing to its strengths instead of fighting against its weaknesses. Whether you're new to software engineering or an experienced engineer, I think you'll find at least a few aha moments that may unlock some things for you. Now, this is one of my longer videos, but I wanted to make sure you can take the workflow and prompt chain I'm going to share with you and start using them right away. We'll build new features into an app we started creating in a previous tutorial, but the app isn't the point. The point is the process, the workflow system, and the prompt techniques. It's just that we have to build something. We're going to be using Aider and Claude 3.5 Sonnet, but like the app, the specific tools aren't the real point. But we have to have a coding assistant and an LLM. I believe the fundamentals are far more important than the tools. And when you master the fundamentals, you unlock some crazy potential. Let's get into it. So just as a quick recap of what we did in the last tutorial in this series, we started with a simple project idea. I want to build an AI-powered brainstorming journaling app, and we gave some details. And then we went to our Cody AI coding assistant and selected from a prompt library that we used to generate first a requirements list that we then approved with the help of the prompts from our prompt library. And then we generated the requirements for a technical stack to support our requirements. And then we used another prompt from the library to generate these user stories that satisfy the requirements for our scaffolding, which is basically setting up all of our framework, getting a functioning hello world level type of application that we can then build on in future sprints. And then last, we used a prompt from our local directory to help guide the implementation of those stories. And in the end, we ended up with this, or some version of this. Again, LLMs, AI, generative AI in general is non-deterministic, so yours will definitely look different than this. That's okay, because we'll be working on this, iterating on this, and it will change. So in the previous tutorial, we did follow a workflow whereby we used prompts from a library to help us flush out our requirements and then our user stories, and then to help us create the code for those user stories. In this particular tutorial, we're going to refine that and kick it up a notch. We're going to put this into something I'm referring to as a workflow chain. What is it? Don't worry about it right now. I'm going to give you a high-level explanation that's going to become really clear once we start executing these prompts. But in essence, what we have is we have a series of prompts, and consider, like each time you see phase here, a prompt that feeds into another prompt. So first of all, we would need to know where we are relative to the requirements for our app. Which ones have we implemented? Which ones have we not? And the prioritized list of what we should probably attack next. So that prompt's going to generate a report that tells us that. And that's going to feed into another prompt, the sprint story generation prompt, which is going to take that set of prioritized requirements and then generate a set of user stories with acceptance criteria just enough to fill up a sprint or our next iteration. Then that's going to generate a report that's going to feed the story analysis prompt. And that prompt's job is to take each of those user stories and break them down into very small, discrete steps, and then to generate a report that says, hey, story 1, step 1, step 2, step 3, story 2, step 1, step 2, step 3, and the details for each one. Then we're going to feed that report into another prompt known as the story implementation prompt. And now the job of that one is to take each of those stories and steps, one step at a time, and help us modify the code. And so we're going to be in this cycle at that point of story 1, step 1, implement the code, verify the code, story 1, step 2, and so forth until we've completed all the stories. You're going to see this in action, like I said, but this page provides an overview and various ways to look at this workflow, and it also provides links to each of the prompts that are part of this workflow. For example, the first one, which is the implementation status analysis prompt, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, that's going to become clear, but the idea is that basically we have a workflow that's repeatable, backed by a chain of prompts that actually feed each other to get the job done. All right, so for Aider to execute all the prompts in our chain, obviously it has to have access to all of our prompts in the chain. So what I'm going to do for convenience, they're available in this GitHub repo, and I'm going to provide a link to that, and I highly encourage you to go out and check out the repo, including the description of this workflow and how the prompts interact together. But for convenience, I've provided a zip file that you can simply unzip into your project folder, like so, and it will unzip to a .prompts directory, and it'll have all of the prompts in the chain. And so do that first, and then we'll proceed. All right, so I wanted to clarify some things because you're going to see me doing some things as we work through our workflow chain in Aider. So here is Aider's help, and you can see Aider offers a lot of different commands. We're not going to focus on all these. I encourage you to explore them because a lot of them are very helpful. But in particular, you're going to see me using this chat mode. And what that does is it allows us to switch in Aider between this mode called ask, in which case it says ask questions about the code, but really all it means is whatever we do while we're talking with Aider, while we're in our chat with Aider, it will never try to edit, delete, or create any new files. And then there's the other mode that's actually the default mode when you launch Aider, called code mode. In this mode, Aider's free to edit, delete, create new files. Sometimes, especially when we're starting to invoke our workflow chain or one of our prompts, we do not want it to start editing or creating files. So what you're going to see me do is I'm going to use chat mode to flip over to ask. Once we get a plan together, then we're going to flip over to code mode so that Aider can create documents or edit files or whatever. So I wanted to make that clear. We'll use /chat mode ask, and then we'll flip over to /chat mode code, and that's the rationale for doing that. Now I want to take a minute to let you know that we've just launched a new Skool community, also by the name Coding the Future with AI. You can expect much deeper discussions on the topics we're discussing here, plus a lot more topics, all related to using AI for software development. You'll be able to ask for help others, join group calls to get help, and share your experience. We'll also offer other learning material there that goes beyond what we can offer here on our YouTube channel. Right now, you can join this community for free. And once you join, your membership will remain free forever. However, we will be moving to a paid subscription by no later than the end of this year, 2024. Again, if you join before we transition to paid membership, you'll be grandfathered in and keep your free membership. Now, I put the link to the new community in this video's description. If you're getting value from our YouTube content, you're definitely going to get even more value from our community. All right, after our last tutorial, we had a requirements file, we had our scaffolding stories, we implemented the stories to scaffold our project, and you should now have a .prompts directory if you unzip the file that I shared with you. These are the 4 prompts that we're going to be invoking. And as a reminder, this is how we run our app, npm run serve. And then if I click on this link, this is where we left off. Yours is going to look different, as I mentioned before. That's okay, but this is where our starting point for this tutorial. So if you recall from our little overview of our workflow chain, our first order of business is to figure out where we are with our requirements. What have we implemented? What have we not implemented? What have we partially implemented? And what are our highest priority requirements? So we have a prompt for that, implementation status analysis prompt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch Aider. And what we're going to do first is, remember the chat mode, I'm going to put us into ask mode, so no files will get created until we're ready. So next I need to start adding context to Aider. For example, we need this prompt in our context. So we're going to use the read-only command to add in our prompt, .prompts /read-only.prompts, and add in just this command, which is this file, implementation status prompt. So we're going to add implementation status prompt to our context, and then this prompt requires several pieces of information: our project requirements, the last set of user stories, this should really say, so our scaffolding user stories, and then some information on our core tech stack, which is contained in our package.json file. So we're going to also go ahead and add that. Now the prompt will ask us for it, but I found it just to work better when we add that ahead of time. It just saves a lot of cycles. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. So our requirements list is here under project docs requirements. So I'm going to add project docs. Project docs. By the way, I'm just tabbing to complete this. Requirements. So we have our requirements, our current user stories, meaning our last user stories really, for our scaffolding user stories. So prompts, project docs / user stories for scaffolding. Now our core tech stack, which I said we're going to get from our package.json this time, because we have one. Make sure you don't add package-lock.json. That's huge and it will go awry. So package.json, not package-lock.json. So now we have all 3 bases covered, and we'll go ahead and hit enter. Now, Aider has the prompt and all three pieces of context it needs. So now if we looked at the prompt, how do we invoke it? So we invoke it with this command, #analyze-prompt. And so now it's invoking the prompt, and it's going step by step through step 1, step 2, step 3. We'll see it go through this. So first of all, it says, yep, I've got everything I need, the requirements list, the user stories, and the package.json, so we know what the tech stack is. Now to fully analyze, remember what we're doing here is we're trying to figure out where the gaps are in requirements, what we've implemented, what we partially implemented, what we haven't started yet, and then a prioritized list of requirements, what it thinks we should attack next. So it's going to need a few files to make that determination. We'll say, yeah, go ahead and look at those files. Remember, it cannot edit anything or create anything or delete anything right now. All right, so now it's heading to step 2. Now it has everything it needs. It's going to say, okay, now these are the completed features, it looks like. Basic routing, it walks us through that. Here are the partially implemented features. And here are the not yet implemented features. And oh, by the way, here's what I think your priority order should be next. Priority 1, priority 2, priority 3. Now, you should always review these things, and you could modify these. You could ask it to change these. You don't agree with the priority. However, that would be a very long video. The point of these videos is to basically communicate a possible approach, a workflow, a way of chaining things. It's a technique to explore. It's really not about the details of everything at this point. So anyway, we won't get into that. I encourage you as you go to actually review these, and if you don't agree with them, to modify them. All right, so now it gives us instructions for how to proceed. We can either approve or give it changes. We're just going to approve it. Approve it for now and move on. Now it's going to go through step 4, which is basically saying, hey, you're ready to store this file. I can either store it to a default location, project docs, or you can specify. I'm just going to say, no, just go ahead and save it to the default. Basically, no tells it, save it to the default. I don't want to provide a specific location. Okay, now the prompt, the instructions in the prompt are telling us what to do next, and that is to move to Aider's code mode so it can actually save these to a file. And then it says now, after you switch to code mode, enter save to file. That will allow Aider to actually try to save the file. And of course, Aider always, before it creates a new file, it asks for our permission. So this is what it plans to save to the file, which is the thing we approved before, ask for more permission, and now we have under Project Docs Analysis and Implementation Status Report that basically contains all of the stuff that we just reviewed. Okay, let's take a quick look at the implementation status report that we just generated. So first of all, that prompt generated a list of completed features. So basically looking at our previous sprint stories, analyzing a little bit of the code, it figured out that we have project setup, basic navigation, the beginnings of some state management and form handling, some things that we started working on like entry management, basic form structure for managing journal entries, and stuff that's not yet implemented like tagging, AI integration, local storage. And when it says local data storage, what do you mean? Like the browser's local storage of the data we're implementing, not the database or anything like that. We're not even concerned about that yet. And then it recommends a priority order for the next few features. And it's saying basically priority 1 should be finishing our entry storage and retrieval system, creating and saving entries, listing and viewing entries, things like that. And then being able to store those to the local storage, the browser storage, and then starting to work on some tag management filtering. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use our prompt that takes this report and these priorities and starts to generate some stories for our next sprint based on these priorities. So now back in Aider, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to ask mode, so we're not in code mode, again, so that Aider doesn't go off and start trying to create any files for us. We go back to ask mode. And once again, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the prompt for story generation, and we're going to figure out what inputs. Now, it's going to ask us, if we don't provide the inputs, it's going to realize it doesn't have them. It's going to start asking, but I found it's just smoother to go ahead and look at the requirements that it has, and go ahead and add in what it needs. It just works better. So we're going to do /read only to first read in the prompt that we're going to need, because we didn't do that yet. We need to add the sprint story generation prompt, obviously. So we're going to add that, and then we're going to add in the requirements, which is the requirements markdown file that it's going to need. And it says it's going to need the previous sprint's user stories. So under project docs, we have the user stories for the scaffolding, which was the first sprint. We're going to add that to the context. We're going to add the implementation status report, which we just generated with the first prompt. And that's under analysis, implementation status. And then the tech stack, which is going to be represented by our package.json, not package lock, package.json. All right, so that's the prompt and all of the input requirements it needs. Now, so we go up to the prompt and we figure out how do we actually execute this prompt, and that's with the hashtag generate sprint stories command. So we go back into Aider, we execute that command. So it starts executing the prompt, and it looks for all of its requirement inputs. It says it finds them. It says it doesn't see the previous sprint's user stories, but we did add them. So what we're going to say is, I did give you the previous sprint's user stories. So sometimes we have to ping in a little bit. It says, yes, I apologize. You're right, I can see them, and it gets the right file. So now it gives us a summary of that, and it says, what sprint number should I use? So we'll just consider our scaffolding sprint, the previous one, sprint 1. We'll call this one sprint 2. All right, so it's going to go in following the instructions in the prompt. It's going to go through and do some additional analysis using those priorities from the implementation status report that we generated. And now it's going to say, okay, now I'm going to recommend these stories for sprint 2. Story S2.1, implementing the core entry management features. It generates some acceptance criteria for us here. Gives us a few developer notes. These are really just to serve as hints during the implementation phase. They're not, they're just hints for the developer. Then story S2.2, implementing local storage and so forth. So acceptance criteria for all of these. We're just going to go ahead, and it's looking to actually add some source code. It may revise the plan, the sprint stories based on what it sees there. Would you like to? Okay, let's go ahead. There's another one it wants to add. Okay, I guess it wants to do some more analysis before finalizing the sprint stories. Okay, so based on what it saw in those files, it's reviewing, it's revising its sprint stories. So S2.1, S2.2, S2.3. So 3 sprint stories. And it explains why it chose what it chose, and it's asking us to approve it. We're just going to go ahead and approve those. Again, you would review all this stuff, and it's asking you, hey, would you like to make any changes? You would always do that, but for our tutorial, we're not going to do that. They looked pretty good to me. All right, so we approved it, and now it's saying, hey, would you like to save this to a specific file, or if not, I'm going to save it to this default location. I'm going to say no, which will make it save it to the default location. Then it gives us a hint like before to switch back to Aider's code mode so I can actually save the file. And then it says, then just tell me save to file. All right, so it's going to basically go back through all of that, and it's going to try to create a file. Aider's going to come back and ask for permission to create that file for us. And we say yes, of course. And here under Project Docs Sprints, we're going to have a new set of sprint stories. So real quick, let's just take a peek. It looks to me like it's exactly what we approved before. We have 3 stories for sprint 2, and with some pretty clear acceptance criteria. Here I see that Aider forgot that it actually created this directory, so I'm going to say, nah, don't bother creating it. You already did that, actually. Okay, so now we have our sprint stories. The next step is to now analyze these stories and break them down into very fine-grained steps, because that's what we want to implement. Okay, now to break down the sprint stories into fine-grained steps, we want the next prompt in our chain, the story analysis prompt. And so this prompt, if we look at the role, It says, your task is to break down a user story into atomic functional steps that can be implemented sequentially. All right, so like before, down here in Aider, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we are in ask mode so that it doesn't try to create any files. And like before, we're going to read in the prompt, read only, prompts / and this time the story analysis prompt. Then we're going to look at the story analysis prompt and see what inputs it requires. So it looks like the only input it requires are the sprint stories. So the sprint 2 stories. So we're going to add that. Project doc / sprints / sprint 2 stories. And so that should be it. Now if we look at the prompt, not that prompt, the story analysis prompt, we'll see that in order to invoke it, we use hashtag analyze story. And then it's just not the entire file, it's a particular story. Story s x.y. So this is going to be, we're going to start with story s2.1. And it's going to break down this story into steps. So it starts checking for its inputs and it finds the inputs, which is basically the sprint stories. And then it assures us that it understands sprint story s2.1 and acceptance criteria, asks for permission to proceed with the analysis. We say yes, and it's going to analyze each acceptance criteria. It breaks them down one by one. And then it goes on to generating the implementation steps one at a time. So story s2.1, step 1 is going to be create the entry data structure, and it gives details on that. And then step 2 is extending the entry form UI, and explains what that means. And basically it's broken that story down into seven discrete steps. Now I will tell you that sometimes what's going to happen is during the implementation of one of these steps, sometimes a subsequent step happens to get covered. And that's okay as long as we get them all covered and we don't break the application and we get all of the stories implementation complete and correct. So anyway, you might see what I mean. We'll see what happens, but a lot of times that's just going to happen. That's pretty natural. All right, so anyway, we have 7 discrete steps. And again, you should verify all of these look correct and then offer some suggestions for changing it if it doesn't look like what you really want. But here we're just going to say approved. And then it comes back and it says, hey, would you like to specify a specific location to save the file? I'm going to say no, just save it to your default location. So we're going to see a new report in a moment. Oh, after we actually move back to Aider's code mode so it can actually create the file. And then it says, tell me then to save the file. This could probably be automated a little bit more, but we'll fine tune it. We're still learning this stuff. All right, so it's just getting ready to write this out, and it's going to ask us if we approve of it, and if it can create the file, we'll say yes, of course, and you'll see now we have project docs, story steps. Okay, under project docs analysis, we have the story steps. Here we can see those are the same steps that we just approved. Step 1, step 2, step 3. Okay. All right, so from here, what we're going to do is we're going to start implementing these step by step. And for that, we have our last prompt in the chain. Okay, and that prompt is the implementation prompt. Again, it's under your .prompts directory if you unzip the file. Now for this one, you can see it says your role. Your task is to carefully implement one specific step from the story steps analysis, ensuring all requirements are met using only approved dependencies. All right, and there's a lot of instructions here. And we're going to see that this particular prompt requires 2 inputs. First, the story steps report, the one that we just generated, that breaks down the steps one by one for each story. And then also the overall sprint story, so the sprint stories file as well. So that's what we're going to provide. So first off, just like before, make sure that we're in Aider's ask mode, not code mode, so that it doesn't try to create any files yet. Then, like before, we're going to read in the prompt, just this prompt here, the implementation prompt. Not the analysis prompt, the implementation prompt. Be very careful what you put in here. And it requires the sprint stories. We'll start with the steps report, analysis, and then the story steps. And then also the sprints, the sprint stories rather, sorry. And those are only 2 inputs. All right, so now if we look at how do we invoke this prompt, hashtag implement step, and because now we're working at the story level, we have to provide the story number that we care about from the user stories, and we're going to go with, well, if we look at the story steps report, we're going to see that we're going to go with story s2.1 first. And then because this prompt works on a step at a time within the story, we have to provide a step number. So we'll start obviously with step 1. So we say s2.1 step 1. And then it verifies it has the context that it needs. And then it gives us a little bit of information about what step 1 entails. And then it asks for our permission to proceed with creating an implementation plan. Now this is important because especially this prompt, we have instructed it, and you can look at, I encourage you to actually review these very detailed prompts offline here, but it's very important that we say, first you create a plan, then we'll look at the plan and improve it. If we don't like it, we'll change it. And then, and only then, should you proceed with trying to make any code changes. But we'll go ahead and say, yeah, proceed with creating an implementation plan. So again, this is story S2, step 1 only. And it looks at certain files and it says, hey, I'm going to need to change these. I might have to create a utility function. I might have to do this and that. We're going ahead and say approved. Again, always review this stuff on your own. And then it says, okay, now we need to actually start making some code changes for step 1. So put us back into code mode. And now tell me to, and I could make this much shorter, but okay. Yeah, we're refining this. All right, implement approved plan step by step. I'll implement the plan step by step. And so it's starting to go through the plan that it just created, which includes changes to the entry, actually creation of an entry.js file. So we'll say, yes, go ahead and create the file. And so we should see a new file, entry.js. Okay, we do. All right, so let's go ahead and we should check all along the way. We're ignoring unit testing, although it's very important. We'll get into that in future tutorials. But for simplicity, we're only doing manual verification right now. So what we'll do is we'll just go, we have our app running here already. We're going to go over here and we're just going to check in and make sure we at least didn't break anything by refreshing it. Let's test, submit. I'll tell you what, as we go, I'm going to go ahead and I'll open Developer Tools. Now this is going to depend on which browser you're using, but in Safari, it's Develop, Show Web Inspector, and then we'll see things like the local storage, the console, and things like that. This is not for this step, but in a little bit, we're going to need this to verify behavior. Okay, so sometimes it's helpful because it didn't come back and say, hey, we completed step 1. So in these prompts, all of them have a status command. So we go up to the prompt and it says, hey, to check on status, you can do hashtag implementation status. And it will give us a report on the progress so far. And it's saying we're on current step 1, implementation is complete. We have an entry object, proper date formatting for timestamp, unique ID generation. There's no verifiable behavior at this point because things haven't been completely tied together. But now at this point it says, hey, I'm ready, let's go ahead and work on step 2, which is extend entry form UI, text area content, because we don't have a content text area. Right now we have a title and that's all we have. So this should be adding that. So now we're going to go ahead and say, and it even gives us the next command to run. But again, remember, we need to go back to ask mode. So because we want to plan first, we don't want Ada to start trying to invoke or execute any code. So we're going to say now start working on step 2, S2.1, step 2. All right, it verifies again that it has the context it needs. It says, hey, here's the here are the requirements for step 2, which is correct text area for content input. And it says, hey, I'm going to need to see, I don't see this source file and I need to analyze it. So we'll say yes, add it. All right, so it reviews it and it revises its plan. And it says, okay, shall I proceed with analyzing an implementation plan? Not writing code, but actually formulating a plan to write the code. So implementation plan for step 2. Required changes need to update the entry form.view file. And walks us through implementation order, adding a text area component, completion. All right. So now it asks us if we approve the plan. We're going to say, yes, we approved the plan. And it says now again, switch back to code mode. So Aider can actually help generate some code for this plan. And then tell me to, I'm just going to use my arrow key. We already have it in from a previous step. I'm using up arrow, implement, approve plan step by step. And so it's going through the changes, now the details of the changes according to the plan that it made earlier. So file by file. So now it says the form now has proper layout and spacing, yada, yada, yada. Okay, let's go ahead and check out our UI again and see where we are. Okay, so now we have a content text area. Very cool. Let's just see what happens when we put in some E1 and first entry and submit. Probably not. Well, actually, then the console we can see that there's some JSON being output. But we still don't have any local storage connected. Anyway, so that's good. And again, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the implementation prompts, implementation status command to check on our status, just to make sure there aren't more things we need to do for step 2. Okay, so it said completed adding content text area, need to implement entries Pina store, need to wire up form submission store. And let's see, let me just make sure when we look at the story steps that it's not getting ahead of us. All right, visible validation, that's probably just considering it a part of that story, and I don't see any reason why it shouldn't. Okay. So it says implement step number, so I need to just go back and say continue by giving it the implement step S2.12. Again, it'll kick it back in to completing this step. All right, so it reviews everything again. Requirements manually, important story step. All requirements are satisfied. Actually, it says on review again, it says no, we actually are good. All right, and then it says go ahead and proceed to step 3 for this user story. So we'll say, I caught myself. We need to go back into ask mode again. Very important, because if you don't, something could easily trigger Aider to start trying to modify the code before we've actually approved the plan. So now we go back to ask mode and we go implement step S2.1 or story S2.1 step 3. And we're going to see we're in this iterative cycle. And each time we're going to verify. And if we find that step wasn't implemented correctly, we're going to have a chance to correct the system. But you can see how this lets you at least flow through some of the mundane routine steps much easier and more reliably. All right, so let's see. It says all requirements in step 3 are satisfied. Let's see, implement step 3. I found this. Requirements looking at the current entry. I can see step 3 has also already been implemented. So like I said, sometimes this happens because as a natural kind of side effect of trying to implement one thing, it might then at that point find, oh, no, I see in the code that there's actually something that once I do this kind of ties that whole thing together. And then when you analyze it again and again, it'll finally come up with, hey, no, it's already good. All right, so anyway, so it says step 3 is satisfied and move on to step 4. Okay, so we're still in ask mode, no harm because we never left it. We're still good. So implement step S2.1, story S2.1, step 4. Terminology is tripping me up. You got stories and you got steps that are part of a story. All right, so step 4 is creating entry store, adding new entries to store, access to entries collection, state management for entries, and then it talks about that. All right, so let's see. It may even analyze that at this point and find out that it's done. But let's go ahead and say, yes, proceed with an implementation plan. So it's going to analyze everything, figure out what needs to be changed, if anything. It did find some changes that need to be made here. So creating a new file called entries.js for the Pina store. Blah, 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 entry order, acceptance, completion criteria. All right, so please review this. I'm going to approve it. All right, once again, same thing as before. By the way, this is a minor tweak I've made to these prompts just for our convenience here to remind us what to do. That is the only part of any of these prompts that ties this to Aider. That's it, nothing else. We removed that little section from the prompt, and it should, although we haven't tested it, work in other AI coding assistants pretty well. All right, so we switch back over to code mode, and then we say, once again, implement, and I'm just going to use my up arrow, implement approved plan step by step. All right, so it's going through. Now it's doing the detailed analysis of the code changes it needs to make based on its plan that it created before. And it needs, like it said, it's going to need to create an entries.js file. We'll say, yes, you can create that. And let's go over and test our app. We'll refresh just to make sure we didn't break anything. We'll do a T1, test, submit. All right, just to make sure I don't think there's any storage stuff going on. Okay, nothing is broken. Some changes have been made. Now, I'm going to, at this point, create a Pina store, provide. So all this stuff is still background to use the store submission. Okay, so that's still background. So what we're going to do again is we're going to ask it to analyze our status to see where we are. Implementation status, hashtag implementation status. Let's have it do a review. I like to have it do a review after every set of actions that it takes, every set of code changes. So it says, let's see, completed requirements, creating entries Pina store. Current step 4 is complete. Remaining requirements, none for step 4. We can move on to step 5. So I'm just going to copy this. Remember, back to ask mode. Don't forget that part, like I almost did before. Always start off with ask mode. Okay, so we're going to say implement step story S2.1 step 5. All right, so again, it's going back to verifying it has what it needs. It's going to kind of review everything and say, hey, we're going to capture form data at a time step and save the entry to a store. And we're going to say, yes, go ahead and proceed with your implementation plan. So you can see we're just in the cycle of go to ask mode, right? Invoke the prompt. It creates a plan. We review the plan. We approve or change the plan. Then once we've approved it, we basically move back to code mode and we say, now implement the plan. And then it makes some code changes and we verify it. And then we ask, what's the status? And it may say there's more or it's already been covered. And we kind of repeat that cycle for the entire story until all the steps are complete. So I'm going to say, yes, proceed with the implementation plan. Okay, it's going to break down the plan for step 5. Required entry view form needs to be updated. A couple of things there. Yeah, I'm going to approve this plan here. Approved. All right, back to chat, or back to code mode again. And then once again, we say implement approved plan step by step. All right, working through the detailed line-by-line analysis now of the code changes it needs to make, conforming to the plan. This one might be a little bit more involved. Let's see how well it does with this. Add form reset functionality. Ooh, it's dealing with some async await handling. We'll see. Add loading state to submit button, although I don't think we're going to see that because there's not enough data to be waiting for it. And commit. Well, let's see if we see any changes in the app now. So I'm going to save something. Just submit, test. I don't see any changes right now. I wonder though, I'm going to restart the app. Sometimes certain changes, it's not often, but sometimes certain changes require a restart. don't think that's the case here. No, I think all of these so far are still background changes. But to be sure, we're going to have Aider do another review using the implementation status, hashtag implementation status command. Now these commands, again, I'm using the term commands. Aider has commands, those are all the slashes that you see me using. All of the hashtag ones are actually part of the prompts in our prompt chain. So in case that's not clear, when I say command, there are two different types. There's ours and there's Aider's. All right, so anyway, implementation progress, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, and let's see, we're on step 6, and it says, oh, we still need to do step 6. All right, so step 6 says, add success feedback, message, so and then clear invisibility of the feedback. All right, so we're going to go with that. But again, first of all, I'm going to copy this. And then again, remember back to ask mode. All right, implement step story S2.1 step 6. All right, you can see the cycle repeating again. Can we create the implementation plan? Of course you can. It goes through the required changes, says entry view form or entry form.view needs to be updated to add a success message to the display component. And then it gives us that. And then we're going to say, yes, that sounds like a great plan to us. Approved. And again, go back to code mode, Aider code mode. And again, I'll just arrow up. Implement approved plan step by step. Going through the line-by-line code mods that it needs to make based on its plan before, and all right, let's see. Again, every single time, aha, something broke. Now, I'm going to make sure that this wasn't one of those cases where, no, we actually have a compilation error here. All right, so I'm going to show you a nifty thing. I could copy and paste this over to Aider, but I'm going to show you this kind of nifty trick. Now, if you're on Windows, you can use the snipping tool. If you're on Mac like I am, you can use Command Control Shift 4. That's Command Control Shift 4. Take a screenshot, that puts it on the clipboard. Then what I can do in Aider is use its paste command, which basically takes anything on the clipboard and puts it into our context here. And don't worry about this downscaling of the image, it's fine. Okay, so now it sees the prompt. So now what I'm going to say is see app screenshot. Got a problem. All right, so let's see how well it does at fixing this issue that it created. I see the issue, there are 2 on submit declarations in entry form. Oh, so it actually overlooked something, added a second on submit. All right, let's see if it's telling the truth. Let's go back to our app. Okay, all right, so it fixed it, just like that. So that's kind of a nifty little trick. I could have easily just copied the over here, the error that we saw here in the terminal that we're running the app on. But that's handy sometimes, just to be able to add a screenshot. All right, so let's see. Let's have it once again. Oh, I want to just go back and see. I don't think there's any new real behavior here that's been implemented. No, I think it's just, oh yeah. Sorry, that was it. So test. Remember, it said that it's supposed to add a success message that then clears and resets after, and we're supposed to reset the form. Before it wasn't resetting the form on submit. So we're all good there. So perfect so far, except for the one little error, and it fixed it quick. All right, so now we go back to our status. We want to check what is our status now on our steps for this story. All right, so it reviews them again, and it comes back and says, okay, so implementation status, fixing duplicate on submit, fix that, remaining requirements, verify success, and it says, hey, just re-invoke the same command you did before, which is implement step S2.1, the same step we're on, and it puts us back into the middle of that step implementation. All right, analyzing the current implementation. Success message is displayed. We verified that. However, notice we can improve the feedback by including the entry title in the success message. Here's my implementation plan. Okay, it's starting to add a few things we maybe not need. I don't think they're specified. Success message display. It appears after save. Keep it clear and concise. Maybe that's what's triggering this, the clear thing. Ensure consistent user experience. Well, let's let it go with this plan and let's see what happens. We can always use the /undo command in Aider to undo the commit if we break things. Always remember that too. All right, so let's see how well it does this. All right, so back over to our app. We're going to make sure that everything's still functional. Refresh. And now I'm going to say test 1 and my first entry. And submit. Ah, cool. So it added the title, test 1, to the success message. All right, awesome. Let's go ahead and have it review its status one more time. Implementation status. All right, let's see what it's saying here. Completed these, form validation, fixing duplicate on submit. It did that. Already did that. Cancel functionality, implement. So now it says move on to the last step for our story once current error is fixed. Oh, it thinks there's still an error. Let's see. Hopefully it doesn't fix something or break something that's fixed already. Error should now be resolved. Maybe there's a no. It components. All right, we're going to do this again and say, I'm going to do this. Take another screenshot. Do what we did before. I'm going to do the paste, /paste, to paste in this new screenshot. And I'm going to say, I think you undid a fix you already made. And again, if this goes wrong, we'll do /undo. And if we have 2 bad commits, we'll do /undo twice. All right, so let's see. Change fixes syntax error. All right, let's see if it really fixed it again, what it broke the first time. Refresh. All right, so far. Test 2, second, whatever, submit. All right, back in business. Whew, okay. All right, so had that gone awry, we could have done /undo as many times as we need to have Aider automatically undo and roll back things, just in case you wondered about that. Let's try one more time with an implementation status to see what else we need to do. Nope, and it's in kind of a loop thinking that that it needs to fix an error that it already, I think. Let's see. No, it didn't break it that time. T1, T2, test, submit. Oh, it's still good. Let's see, missing comma. Oh, it must have been a syntax error, a non-breaking syntax error that it was fixing. All right, so let's see, 7. Clear form data, clears all form fields. 7, everything is there. However, I am wondering, I want to search for something. Local storage. Oh, that must be the second story. I thought that we were going to be storing the local storage in story 1. Nope, everything is golden because we're not supposed to be at the local storage just yet. That's the next story. So, speaking of, here's what we're going to do. Is I'm just to make sure we have a really clear context, I'm going to exit Aider. And now that we're finished with an entire story, that's a whole lot. So I like to be, like when I'm doing these major tasks and doing a lot of stuff, I kind of like to start over and make sure my context is nice and clean and pristine before I move on to the next one. So I'm restarting Aider. Same thing. What we're going to do now is we're going to move on to breaking down story S2.2 into steps and then doing that same cycle where now one step at a time implementing the features using the implementation prompt. So hopefully this is all making sense, but we're kind of this iterative loop. We break sprint stories down using a prompt into steps, and then we take another prompt and we go okay, that story, step 1, that story, step 2, that story, step 3. And then when we're done with the story, we have to go back to the top and say, and now analyze the story, break that next story down into steps. Now implement step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. So now we're going to go back, and we're going to say again, back to ask mode in Aider /chat mode ask. And we've got to get this, again, get the story analysis prompt, the one that breaks down the next story, back into context. So we say read only .prompts /story analysis prompt. Now what does it require again? It needs just the sprint stories, right? This. So what we're going to say is pull in those sprint stories. So the prompt itself, and then just the sprint stories. That's it. Okay, now how do we invoke that prompt again? Hashtag analyze story. And remember, we're now on S2.2. That's the story. All right, so story analysis and the story number. All right, so it says it found what it needed, which were the sprint stories. And it tells us what that story is, so that that gives us a cross-reference, cross-check, make sure we're talking the same, singing from the same sheet of music. And we say, yes, go ahead and analyze the required functionality. Goes through all the acceptance criteria for S2.2, starts to break this down. All right, to step 1, enable basic local storage integration. It gives details on that. S2. Okay, we've seen this before, S3, step 4. So this time it only broke it down into 4 steps, whereas it broke the last story down into 7 steps. But anyway, so it says, do we approve this? Again, I can't stress enough, you should go back and review these and make sure nothing seems off. And then it gives you a chance to modify it. But I'm going to say approved. And again, it's offering to save this. And I'm just going to go with the default, so I'm going to say, no, I don't want to provide a specific file, just pick one. And then I'm going to go back to code mode again. Yeah, we're back in that cycle because it's got to create the file. It's not implementing code, but it needs to create a file. So the code mode is basically hey, I can edit things. And then it says, save this to file, tells us what to do. All right, so it's reviewing all the steps again. Then it's going to ask us, hey, can I create that file? Yes. And you'll see here, now we have under the project docs analysis, a new set of story steps. So S2.2, we have step 1. We already kind of took a look. It's just the things, the content that we approved previously. All right. So now we've got our story, S2.2 story broken down in implementation steps, and I think you know what's coming next. I'm going to go ahead and start a new session. And now we're on to actually, so I'm back in Aider with a new session. Again, back to chat. I'm going to ask, always back to ask mode first. Right? Now I need to load the implementation prompt back into context again. So .prompts / implementation, not analysis, implementation prompt. Be careful because tab complete, autocomplete can get you. And now we look again, remind ourselves, like, what does this prompt require? The story steps report. Now remember, it's not S2.1. We're done with that. It's S2.2, and then the sprint stories themselves. So we add the report first. It doesn't matter which order, really. S2.2 story steps, and then project docs / sprints / and then the sprint 2 stories. That's it. Now, how do we start this off? We say hashtag implement step. And now this time it is story S2. Now I'm in the story steps report. I can get all the information from there. S2.2, step 1, always in order. Step 1 for S2.2. Now from here on out, to speed this up, I'm not going to talk you to death all through this stuff. Basically, if I run into any issues where there's something that would be helpful for you to understand, like there's an error, something's not going right, how to correct it that we haven't already gone over, like we corrected the one issue by giving it a screenshot of the error, then I'm gonna roll through this, and only if there's something new, I'll pause, and then I will let you know what's going on. Okay, I'm just checking in after we've finished up implementing story S2.2. So this story was about implementing local storage service, which just basically means that now our entries for our app should be going to the browser's local storage. And so we verify that, so we're complete with story S2.2. Now I'm going to proceed with the very last story for the sprint or iteration. That will be story S2.3. So before I go on, let's just take a quick look at what story S2.3 entails. This is our last story for the sprint. So in this one, we're going to create an entry list view. So far, we're able to store entries, titles, entry content, but we don't have a way to display them as we create them. So that's what this story is going to be about. All right, I'll be back with you shortly. Okay, let's review the requirements or the user stories for this sprint. So the first story involved implementing core entry management. So we can enter journal entries, check. The second story was about now storing those entries in the browser's local storage. We confirmed that we're doing that. And then our last story that I just implemented was creating the entry list view so we can actually see a list of our entries in the browser. So let's take a quick look at that. So we can see that we can submit entries. We have an entry list view. It's fairly rudimentary, but we'll refine it and revise it in future sprints. That's kind of what it's about, but this is incremental. Everything's working, it's responsive, that sort of thing. We're good there. So one thing we'll see though is that during the previous tutorial, when we scaffolded the project, it just so that it could test out some of the core underlying functionality, we had implemented some things like a counter, which we don't really need anymore. And also there was a simple fetch data that fetches some canned data. We don't need either one of these anymore. So what I'm gonna do now is, it's not part of the story, but I wanna do some cleanup. And we can actually create prompts, reusable prompts to do these kinds of things too. To basically have it look at the screen and say, hey, remove all of the elements that really aren't part of our core requirements. We don't need those anymore. So I'm gonna do that next. All right, so one simple prompt, directing Aider to clean up all the leftovers from our sprint one, and we're good to go. Now these are still very early days, and we have a long way to go to really learn how to best integrate AI into our software development work. And we're still skipping critical components in our workflows like unit and integration testing. We'll get there soon. The system I've shared is a work in progress and likely will be for some time. Like you, I'm still learning. But I hope this video inspired you to experiment with these ideas, maybe even test out the workflow and prompts I've shared in your own work. There are several other videos on this channel that show you how to build apps using AI. If you found the topics in this video interesting, you'll likely enjoy those as well. And again, we'd love to meet you in our Skool community. We dive into these topics and much more in that community. If you'd like to see more videos on this and other topics, please let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, please give a like and subscribe. I'm Tim Kitchens, coding the future with you, and I look forward to seeing you in future videos.